Right now it's the end of August. In a few days it will be September, and then within a few short weeks or months, in parts of the northern hemisphere, winter conditions will begin to set in, and they will not relent for many, many months. And this is particularly true in Russia, which famously, in most years, is the coldest populated place on the planet. That is a significant detail, and every year as the war in Ukraine grinds on, you can see strategies begin to shift as winter approaches. Winter is coming and both sides know this. And typically as we get closer to winter, we will see both sides beginning to ramp up strikes on energy infrastructure. This year is no exception. Although if it is an exception, it's an exception because Ukraine's strikes against Russian energy are far more aggressive than anything we've seen in previous years. In fact, what we're seeing right now is very significant, because it looks like previous years have simply been warm-up drills. Previous winters have been practice exercises. And this winter, potentially, right now, seems to be the year that Ukraine is going for the kill shot. Really working hard, not just to damage Russian energy infrastructure, but actually to take Russian energy infrastructure offline and to punish Russia in a very major way. Now, what I'm talking about, of course, is a possibility, not a certainty. Nothing is ever a certainty. But things certainly seem to be pointing in a certain direction right now. Within the past month, we've seen several significant attacks on Russian energy infrastructure that in many ways are unlike any other attacks we've ever seen. First of all, there's the targets themselves, with Ukraine actively striking oil pipelines, and Ukraine actively striking port facilities that Russia actually uses to load energy onto their shadow fleet, showing that Ukraine might be making a concerted effort to actually stop the Russian oil trade with military action, not just with sanctions that are only partially effective. And at the same time, simultaneously, we see Ukraine hitting Russian oil refineries in a new way. Whereas before they used to strike Russian oil refineries once and then move on to the next refinery, Ukraine is now hitting the same oil refineries again and again and again, multiple times on the same refinery. These concentrated subsequent strikes are really just beginning, but already we are seeing them being just devastatingly effective, particularly within certain regions of Russia. When Ukraine hits the same refinery over and over and over again, they can effectively take that refinery offline. And there's only so many refineries in any given region. For a lot of regions in Russia, they rely on a single oil refinery to get all of their domestic gasoline. And for that reason, a lot of regions in Russia are having massive gasoline shortages right now, with kilometer-long queues, or maybe even longer, of people sitting in cars waiting to get gasoline because there are just so few gas stations with it. And in many cases, vehicles are being abandoned all across Russia because there's just simply no gasoline to be had. In fact, in some regions of Russia, particularly within the Far East, gasoline is actually being rationed, and civilians are effectively being told that they can no longer purchase gasoline, or that they can only purchase very limited amounts, causing them to make immediate and often drastic adjustments to their lifestyles because they just cannot get enough energy. And that's because the military in those regions, the Russian military, needs that energy, and there's only so much of it to go around. And here we see a whole lot of weaknesses within Russia right now. First of all, the military is actually afraid of running out of the energy resources that it needs to continue functioning. And that is going to have an effect on the rear and eventually on the front line. But even more so at the home front, that is going to breed resentment. And in particular, a lot of the shortages are happening in regions where people are already becoming rather resentful towards the Russian government because of unfair draft and conscription and recruitment practices, but also because there is not enough police protection in those regions, causing Russian oligarchs to step in and fund basically vigilante groups to step in the place of the Russian federal government. We see a lot of internal strife where people are losing their faith in the government because the government cannot protect them physically, and the government cannot protect supply lines to keep their lives functioning. The work behind today's episode was made possible by my sponsor, Incogni. There are a lot of unique problems that come with living in a modern world, and many often come back to the same root. I'm talking about things like scams, identity theft, online stalking, harassment, data breaches, and so many more. They all often start with your data being exposed across the internet. Not only are these details often leaked, they're actually actively bought and sold by people like data brokers, who can legally publish and profit from selling deeply personal information. This can include things like your name, personal address, court records, and even your political views being sold to anyone, including employers, landlords, and even complete strangers. Thankfully, you do have a right to protect your privacy, and this is what Incogni helps with. Incogni can track down and remove your personal data from most sites all across the internet, and this process is automated and repeated so that your data doesn't reappear. But even better than that, Incogni's custom removal feature can remove almost everything that's exposed about you online. All you have to do is send them a link, and their dedicated privacy expert will handle everything else. And with their unlimited plan, you can submit as many links as you want. So choose Incogni to take back control of your personal data. All you need to do is create an account, authorize Incogni to remove your data, and they handle the rest. Incogni offers a risk-free 30-day money-back guarantee. So try it out, give it a shot, and get a full refund if you're not 100% satisfied. Just click the link in the description and use my code Warburg to get 60% off an annual plan. And get started today. As winter hits, Russians will obviously need more energy to do basic things like heat their homes. But they'll also need more energy to do things like have supply lines deliver them their food and medical necessities. And this is all rather embarrassing for a country like Russia, because when it comes to the Russian economy, there are not many things that they have ever done well. But one thing that they have always relied upon is their energy independence, and in fact, their energy exports. Russia has jokingly been called a gas station disguising itself as a country, and there is a lot of truth to this. Russia does not have a lot of exports, and it does not manufacture a lot at home. And that means that in order to keep the society functioning, Russia needs to continue selling energy to other countries and to use that money to buy manufactured goods from other countries and bring them back into Russia. But now Russia does not even have enough energy to meet their domestic needs because their refineries are getting shut down, and at the same time, their export routes are also getting shut down. For the time being, this is a limited crisis. Mostly the crisis exists on the fringes of Russian society, in the Far East. But as things progress, and they probably will because Ukraine's strikes show no signs of relenting, that crisis is going to trickle in more towards the center of Russian society, more towards Moscow and St. Petersburg, particularly because Ukraine can start to ramp up the strikes with things like their new Flamingo cruise missiles, which can hit much deeper than the drones that they've been using to strike Russian refineries, but they can also hit much harder, causing much more devastating effects that take much longer to be recovered from, if they can be recovered from at all. These, though, are just the immediate effects. If things continue, things could actually get much, much worse for Russia. So bad, in fact, that Russia could actually find itself in a place where they cannot actually recover. That might seem like an exaggeration, but something similar has actually happened to Russia before, and they were only able to recover for one reason, a reason that is no longer valid. After the Soviet Union collapsed, something happened to Russian energy infrastructure. Because Russian energy infrastructure sat offline for a very short period of time during some very cold months of the harsh Russian winters, particularly in Siberia. A lot of that energy infrastructure, oil pipelines, oil wells, things of that sort, froze up. And as it froze up, it caused cracks. And it caused such severe damage that essentially thousands of kilometers of Russian energy infrastructure had to be completely replaced, putting Russia in a chicken or egg situation. They needed the revenues from the energy infrastructure in order to repair the energy infrastructure, but they also needed the energy infrastructure to be online in order to earn those energy revenues. In that case, Russia got out of the situation because a lot of Western countries came in to help them recover. Now, at that time, the Western world was happy to help. People were excited about the collapse of the Soviet Union. They were excited about the rise of democracy. They were excited about the rise of capitalism within Russia, and they even had a profit incentive to invest in Russia in the short term to build up networks by which they could profit in the long term. That's capitalism in action. But this type of aid is unlikely to happen again for several reasons, all pertaining to the war in Ukraine. Obviously, a lot of people are upset with Russia because of what they've done, and they just don't want to do business in Russia. But even for selfish reasons, people are just not confident anymore about doing long-term business in Russia that requires billions of dollars of capital investments. Because they know how quickly the Russian government can turn on them. They know how quickly the Russian government can take their investments from them and nationalize them or give them to a Russian oligarch. Anything of that sort. And that means that if Russia finds itself in a similar situation, they might be up a creek without a paddle. So this winter, as Ukraine ramps up their strikes on Russian energy infrastructure, and Russia now has nowhere to sell their energy, nowhere to store it, and nowhere to use their energy even domestically, they're going to find themselves in a situation where they do have to shut a lot of energy infrastructure offline. And a lot of that energy infrastructure could freeze up, putting Russia in a position where their finances are crippled for the foreseeable future. Now, they'll do the best they can to manage this situation. They'll turn off as little as possible and try to isolate the problems to specific areas. But they can't prevent the damage as a whole. And we know that, and we potentially see Ukraine now trying to take advantage of that. For their part, Russia's other partners in the world, partners like China, are also unlikely to help Russia escape this. In fact, they're far more likely to just actually take advantage of the situation. And we know that for a fact, because China has already found Russia in this exact situation, and they have already tried to take advantage of it. As Russia lost their energy partners in the West when they invaded Ukraine, they naturally already have tried to turn to China to ramp up their energy exports. And China has known about Russia's vulnerability. So as Russia has tried to build a new gas pipeline from Siberia down to China to give China energy that it actually desperately needs, China has declined Russia's offer. And China has said that they would only be willing to actually help Russia build this pipeline or allow the pipeline to be built onto their territory if Russia gives them a subsidized price, a price so low that Russia basically does not profit. The price that Russia gives to their own citizens as one of the few benefits they get for living within Russian society. China knows that Russia desperately needs to keep their energy infrastructure online, even if they are barely profiting. And they have already tried to press on that to get as much advantage for themselves as they possibly can. And so China is unlikely to help Russia escape this situation if it gets even worse. Now, you might be tempted to feel bad for Russia, but remember, all of this is simply irony hitting them in the face. When Russia invaded Ukraine, they actually tried to put Europe in this exact same situation. As Europe was entering their winter, Russia tried to use energy as a weapon to keep Europe out of the war. Basically saying, Europe, if you intervene to stop us in Ukraine, we're going to shut off our energy exports to you and you're going to have a rough winter. Well, as it turns out, there was a warm winter that year. Europe was able to get all the energy they needed from other sources, and Europe today is still doing just fine. But there's unlikely to be a warm enough winter in Siberia for the same thing to happen to Russia. And here we see that, as in so many other cases in the war, the very weapons that Russia has tried to use against others are now turning and pointing back at themselves. And it's hard to feel bad for a country that is still actively pursuing that same war and is unrelenting and is unrepentant. So all in all, things are looking bad for Russia this winter already. And it's only barely about to be September. They're only going to get worse. We'll see how bad they get. But if things don't come to a head this year, well, there's always next winter. And one thing that can never be avoided is that winter is coming. Especially if you happen to live in Russia. Thank you so much for watching. And if you appreciate my work and what I do on this channel, please do support my work by liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Both of those things are completely free, but they help me out a lot. And if you want to support me even more, there are several links in the description of this video where you can learn how to do so. I don't expect paid support from anybody, but I really do appreciate it, and it really does keep me going. So thank you guys so much. You guys are the best. If you did like this video, be sure to follow more analysis on the Russia-Ukraine war by watching one of these videos on screen.